Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Darren Brown, and you're listening to California Dream. Today, I want to talk about the type of country that the American conservative movement wants to bring about. And I want to be clear here that I'm not talking about most conservatives in California or even conservatives in general. I'm talking very particularly about the American conservative movement centered around Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, this movement that came into its own with the Tea Party after Obama's election, and of course, really got going with Trump's campaign in 2015. What kind of America does this political movement want? Well, we don't really need to hypothesize much, because we already have an actually existing concrete example of the type of country they do want. And they're quite open about the fact that this is the example of where they want to go. So there's no need to guess or postulate about anything here. They're very clear about what they admire and what example they wish to emulate. So I'm going to read a few quotes here from some prominent members of this American conservative movement. So the first quote is from Rod Dreher. Now, this may be a name that some people haven't heard of. He is an American writer and editor. He works the American Conservative. He's written several books. He's also written for publications such as Wall Street Journal, National Review, the Los Angeles Times. So even though he's not a major name, he's not a nobody. He is definitely kind of a thinker in the conservative movement. So he recently tweeted, quote, "Viktor Orbán wins crushing re-election victory. Groomer's hardest hit. Governor Ron DeSantis, you are onto something." And he also tweeted, quote, "Make no mistake, Viktor Orbán is the leader of the West now. The West that still remembers what the West is." So that was Rod Dreher. Moving on, another person who needs no introduction, Marjorie Taylor Greene, recently tweeted, quote, "Congratulations to Viktor Orbán on winning a victory well-deserved. He's leading Hungary the right way, and we need this in America." Can I read that last part again? Quote, "He's leading Hungary the right way, and we need this in America." Okay, so maybe those are some more marginal figures. How about the former vice president and the former president? So Mike Pence recently appeared last fall in Hungary at kind of a convention where Orbán was present, and he gave about a 20-minute speech. And these are a couple quick quotes from his speech. He said, quote, "From where I stand, I see the people of Central and Eastern Europe rejecting the modern left's vision of a post-Christian, post-national, post-family world." And he also said, "I want to applaud Prime Minister Orbán for choosing to make family the central focus of Hungary's government policy." Unquote. So that was Mike Pence, former vice president of the United States. And Donald Trump, former president, who endorsed Orbán in his election campaign. His endorsement statement was, quote, "Viktor Orbán of Hungary truly loves his country and wants safety for his people. He has done a powerful and wonderful job in protecting Hungary, stopping illegal immigration, creating jobs, trade, and should be allowed to continue to do so in the upcoming election. He is a strong leader and respected by all. He has my complete support and endorsement for re-election as Prime Minister. And last but not least, the chief propagandist of this movement, Tucker Carlson. After Orbán's re-election just a few days ago, he had a segment, and this was part of what he said. Quote, "Hungary is conservative. And let's be clear what we mean by conservative. Hungary is conservative in pretty much exactly the same way the United States was conservative in 1998. Not old-fashioned repressive conservative, whatever that is, but just sort of normal people conservative. The conservative you remember very well before the lunatics took over. So Hungary has stayed that course, thanks to the man you just saw." Talking, of course, of Orbán. "And as a result, it has turned out to be much more successful, by which we mean much more stable and much happier than most of the liberal countries that surround it. That's true. And that's why they hate Viktor Orbán so much. He's a living rebuke to their ideas." Unquote. I would also note that the May meeting of CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Conference, which is kind of the main meeting of all the movers and shakers in American conservative movement. And everyone takes a look at who their speakers are, who wins or comes close to winning their straw polls as an indication of the direction that things are going. So they're very influential organization and influential meeting. So they're having a May meeting coming up, and they are meeting in Hungary. And in fact, guess who their keynote speaker is? That's right. It's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. He's the keynote speaker at the Conservative Political Action Conference. I told you there's no need to hypothesize, no need to postulate here. They're very open about it, that this is the direction that they want to take the country. So, given that so many conservatives in this movement seem to be looking to Viktor Orbán and Hungary as the goal for what they want to bring to the United States, why don't we see what is going on in Hungary? What is Viktor Orbán all about? What do they see in him that they're so enamored of and that they see such an urgency to bring to America? Well, Hungary is an example of what many scholars have come to term competitive authoritarianism. So this is kind of a different kind of concept to get a hold of, but I will quote a paper here. This is by Stephen Levitsky and Lucien Ahmad Way. Hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Quote, "This article examines one particular type of hybrid regime, competitive authoritarianism. In competitive authoritarian regimes, formal democratic institutions are widely viewed as the principal means of obtaining and exercising political authority. Incumbents violate those rules so often, and to such an extent, however, that the regime fails to meet conventional minimum standards for democracy. Competitive authoritarianism must be distinguished from democracy on the one hand and full-scale authoritarianism on the other. Modern democratic regimes all meet four minimum criteria. 1, executives and legislatures are chosen through elections that are open, free, and fair. 2, virtually all adults possess the right to vote. 3, political rights and civil liberties, including freedom of the press, freedom of association, freedom to criticize the government without reprisal, are broadly protected. And 4, elective authorities possess real authority to govern and that they are not subject to the tutelary control of military or clerical leaders. Although even fully democratic regimes may at times violate one or more of these criteria, such violations are not broad or systematic enough to seriously impede democratic challenges to incumbent governments. In competitive authoritarian regimes, by contrast, violations of these criteria are both frequent enough and serious enough to create an uneven playing field between government and opposition. Although elections are regularly held and generally free of massive fraud, incumbents routinely abuse state resources, deny the opposition adequate media coverage, harass opposition candidates and their supporters, and in some cases, manipulate electoral results. Journalists, opposition, politicians, and other government critics may be spied on, threatened, harassed, or arrested. Members of the opposition may be jailed, exiled, or less frequently, even assaulted or murdered. Regimes characterized by such abuses cannot be called democratic. So, what they're getting at here is that this type of authoritarianism is somewhere in between a fully democratic system and a fully authoritarian system. It's a system where you have all the veneer of democratic institutions, you have elections, you have ostensibly a free press and voting rights and opposition rights. But in practice, they're not a fair playing field at all. And this is what we see in Hungary. Viktor Orbán, over the past, more than a decade now, has gradually taken over more and more aspects of the society. He's got increasing control over the media. He has taken a lot of the industries and the corporations in Hungary and has bought them up and kind of divvied them out among his loyalists and supporters. So, in effect, he has major control over many of the key industries in the country. He has passed laws that have changed the way elections are run, so that there is a high degree of gerrymandering, which greatly inflates the number of seats that he would have compared to the actual votes that he receives, which makes it very difficult to vote him out of office. He has intimidated and threatened journalists and has a really undue influence over the media. A good analogy would be to think about Fox News, except on steroids, by a factor of like 10. And that would give you a good idea of what the media is like. He is a self-proclaimed champion of, quote, illiberal democracy, unquote. So, it's right from the horse's mouth. He has used the country primarily to just enrich himself, enrich his friends, to become a kleptocracy. And of course, he has a very socially conservative policy that's very much in line with the white Christian nationalism present in the Republican Party in the United States. He's passed laws restricting rights of LGBTQ. He has passed very restrictive anti-immigration laws. Even the Cato Institute, hardly a left-leaning organization, has condemned Orbán in Hungary for threatening religious liberty. He has discriminated against Methodist, Pentecostal, Adventist, and Reformed Jewish churches, Salvation Army and Jehovah's Witness, and all Islamic, Buddhist, and Hinduist congregations. So basically, if you're not lockstep in line with the very particular version of Christianity that Viktor Orbán prefers, you don't have much religious liberty. Viktor Orbán has been rebuked by the Holocaust Remembrance Project. Quote, Hungary suffers from grave deficiencies in its Holocaust education, memory, and commemoration. The country's right-wing government has attempted to rehabilitate wartime figures as anti-communist icons. So that is Viktor Orbán and Hungary. Anti-democratic, authoritarian, competitive authoritarian, free but unfair elections, state-controlled media, kleptocracy, gerrymandered elections, a sharp infringement on the rights of minorities and civil rights, and a white Christian nationalist worldview. This is the country that the American political conservative movement admires and wants to emulate. I read you those quotes a few minutes ago from Rod Dreher, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Mike Pence, Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson. They are inviting this person as the keynote speaker at their conservative conference. This is no secret. This is what they want. And this is what they'll get as the spineless American left continues to fail us. So the question I want to close with then is Hungary the type of society that California wants to become? Is Hungary, Viktor Orbán's Hungary, the type of society that California wants to live under? If that's not the type of society that you want in California, then you really need to think about how we can prevent this here. And the conclusion that a lot of us have come to is that this is where America is headed, and there's very little that we can do in California to stop this in the rest of the country. And so we need to have a serious discussion about independence for California unless we want to continue to fight against this kind of authoritarian direction that the Republican Party and the conservative movement in America is taking us. Okay, that's all for this week. Hope to talk to you again later. I do have some very interesting guests lined up to come on for interviews that I'm really excited about. So please stay tuned for those interviews coming up the next month or two. Talk to you later.